Thank you very much, everybody. It was indeed the only unconventional thing that I ever did, I think. And the reason that I singled it out is because when you look at my career, it's actually a career that in the past would have been deeply unconventional for a woman. And what I want to talk about tonight is the fact that we have lived through and are still living through a revolution which has touched my life and that of, I think, everybody in this room. And the point that I want to make is that I am a very conventional sort of person. I do the things that are expected of me most of the time. And so I was born late enough that being conventional and conventionally successful as a woman meant that I had a really good education, got good jobs, have had an interesting, varied, and sometimes exciting career. And that has been an entirely normal thing. And even 100 years ago, it was almost unthinkable for more than a tiny number of women to have my sort of life, your sort of life. And today there are a good 75 million people like me, like most of you, who are women, highly educated women, successful professional women. And what I have become increasingly aware of is that in the process, sisterhood has died. Once upon a time, all women had lives in which the only thing that really mattered was whether you made a marriage. If you were fortunate, you made a good marriage. But making a marriage was what really mattered. The nightmare for any girl throughout history was to be left on the shelf. And that's not true anymore. It doesn't mean that family doesn't matter, but there are other things. You don't have to feel that your life is over if you don't make a good marriage. Making a marriage is sometimes great, but it's not what the whole female world is about anymore. And that is a totally new experience. But I also want to not only celebrate this revolution that I have benefited from, and which TEDx encapsulates, but also to underline something which I've become increasingly aware of, which is that although for a good 15% of women in developed societies, and although for many, many millions of women all over the world, my conventional life is their conventional life, in the process, the lives of the vast majority of women have become very different from that of us, the favoured 15%. And it seems to me that we need to recognize this, that one wonderful, successful, ongoing, no doubt incomplete, but nonetheless transforming revolution does not solve all the problems of the world and does not solve all the problems of women in the world either. And that because we are all too often hung up on a simple women versus men gender gap perception of things, we are often, I think, too interned, and we don't recognize how much we are missing about the problems that face the vast majority of people, the vast majority of women in the world. So one of the things which really, in a sense, it doesn't entice me, it infuriates me, but one of the things which is terribly noticeable is the tendency of the world, the educated, the successful, to look at women as though women were just all a mass, women versus men. And at times this can become entirely ridiculous. How many people here know what I mean by Davos man? Davos man rules the world, and these days includes quite a lot of Davos women too. And once a year they meet at something called the World Economic Forum, stuck up on a mountain in Switzerland, and they eat delicious meals, and they fix the world together, and they go home feeling pleased with themselves. And that's Davos man and Davos woman. But the World Economic Forum also likes to feel it has a social conscience, and it puts out this report every year about gender gaps. And basically, a country is good if men and women are the same, and a country is good if women live much longer than men, and a country is bad if there is any respect in which men and women are different. And you end up with completely ridiculous things whereby it's better to be in Russia because the gender gap is longer in Russia because the men die even earlier, whereas Japan looks pretty bad because Japanese men live almost as long as Japanese women. So I think that is a silly way to look at the world, and I think it's worse than a silly way to look at the world, and I think we have to move on, not in the sense of feeling that it doesn't matter what happens to us anymore, but in the sense of realizing that there are other major problems. And that's what I wrote the book about, with lots of facts and I hope also some funny stories. And it's what I actually want to come back to just now. And what is really obvious, as I said, is that the world has changed. And I want to show you this and this. And the thing I want to say about it is that I bet you notice that there are no women there. But even 50 years ago, people just didn't even notice because that was normality. And normality has shifted. And that is the revolution that we have now had. So what does this mean? Well, it means that at the top, that world has vanished. Men and women work together. Women boss men, men boss women. Educated men, educated women, they marry each other, they work with each other, they lead a life which is very integrated. I work in a mixed environment. You work or will work in a mixed environment. And that is the world of the fortunate, the successful. And it's a world, of course, which rests on education, and it's a world in which, actually, if you take the top professional, not the people running FTSE 100 companies, if you take professional jobs in the OECD countries today, 50% are held by men and 50% are held by women. And yes, at the very top, it's still more men than women, but this is a new world. This is a completely different world for those of us who have gone through the education system, become qualified, and moved into something that has never happened in human history. And it's a divide between the women for whom this is their world and other women. And the other thing is that it's coming even faster in the developed world than it did here. This is not just about Sheryl Sandberg. This is not just about Angela Merkel. Maiwati is one of the most important, most powerful politicians in India. Love her, hate her. She's an extraordinary woman. She's a Dalit. She's untouchable. She has made her career entirely as an individual. And if you look at, for example, China or India, and you look at the West when we had comparable levels of income, what is extraordinary is how much more rapidly this equalizing of the political and business and professional classes is than it ever was in the West. So yes, there are still areas where women are treated terribly, areas where men are treated terribly, but what is striking to me is that in the developing world, the change is coming far faster. Now, I don't want to imply that everything is wonderful, and this is why I don't want to imply that everything is wonderful, which is the peacock's tail. And anybody who's done any biology or evolution will know that this was one of the great puzzles. You know, why on earth does this bird have a tail like that? You know, why do peahens go for a guy who is clearly going to be caught by the first fox? You know, why not go for this lean, mean, brown, high-speed bird? Well, the answer is that what that bird is saying to the peahen is, I am so fit that I can escape the fox and still have a tail like this. And one of the things which is actually quite interesting to talk about, the downside for people like us, is that, you know, when you are in a world where you're showing that you can do it all, not just the cooking, not just being the housefrau, you do have to show the world that you are fit. And therefore, one of the things which I think is still a difference between men and women at the top is that we do spend more time worrying about our appearance, not because we're trying to seduce the CEO, but because we're trying to show that we're really still up there and we're somebody you want to hire. And it can be quite costly. And what we're engaged in is costly signalling. But there's a downside to that as well. I mean, we are spending a lot of time showing the world that we're good. Though people who are successful are thin. People who are successful are fit. People who are successful worry about their appearance. One of the things which says to me that the world is still unequal is the marked differences that you get in terms of people who work in an environment where they do that, and women who work in an environment where they don't have any good reason to show that they are fit, competitive people. And the thing that I want to move to now is the world that most women live in. And most women do not live in this world. They live in the world of the 85%, which is still a very gendered world. It's a world in which women and men are still very different, in which women are the ones who interrupt their careers for huge periods of time, do jobs which they can drop in and out of, do the shift work, do the bits here and there, carry the main burden without the nannies and the cleaners that the top 15% can afford. And they work overwhelmingly in environments where they are with other women. And what most women do is they work in workplaces where almost everybody is female and where the jobs that they are doing are the traditional female jobs just taken out of the home and put into the workplace. So where once all women did unpaid female jobs, today some of us do the jobs which successful men have done, and many women are doing traditional caring, cleaning jobs. The only thing that's different is they do them for often extremely low pay, very unfriendly working hours, shift work, as I said, taking the main burden of the money and being paid very, very poorly. And so I think we should celebrate, but we also need to be aware that creating a truly gender-integrated top 15%, having 75 million of us and increasing by the day who are really living very, very interesting lives, does not alter the fact that we are in a society where inequality is increasing and where inequality among women is increasing much faster than inequality among men. Now that's because we've come along further. It's not because there's something horrible about women. The inequality is increasing faster because we had a longer distance to go. But I really want to say to everybody, it is wonderful to be here. It is wonderful that we have TEDx. It's the revolution in the making. But we do need to realize there are still many other problems for women and their men outside in the world. And I do wonder whether the number of women on top company boards is really the challenge that we want to set ourselves for the next millennium. Thank you very much, everybody.